What's going on, everyone? Let me tell you about something that absolutely exploded on First Take this morning that had Stephen A. Smith and the entire panel engaged in one of the most passionate debates of the season about whether we've all been sleeping on a team that nobody wants to talk about as a legitimate contender. I'm talking about the kind of conversation where you have to step back and reassess everything you thought you knew about the NFC playoff race, the type of discussion that forces you to ask uncomfortable questions about whether the so-called favorites are actually better than a team that's been written off, despite having one of the best coaching staffs in football and a core of battle-tested veterans who know how to win in January. This isn't just about the 49ers being a feel-good story or sneaking into the playoffs as a wild card. This is about whether San Francisco at 9-4, with momentum and health returning at the right time, should actually be considered the favorite to win the entire NFC, despite everything they've been through this season. So buckle up, because what I'm about to share from today's First Take broadcast isn't just about one team's resurgence. It's about championship DNA, about organizational culture, about coaching excellence when it matters most, and about why betting against Kyle Shanahan's 49ers in December and January might be the biggest mistake any analyst could make. Niners faithful, I need you right now. This content doesn't reach the fans who need it without your help. That like button is how we grow, how we build, how we make this the home for Niners fans on YouTube. One click, 1 second changes everything. If you bleed orange and blue, and you love this content, prove it right now. Smash that like button. Let's build this together. Once a Nurse, always a Niners. All right, here's the situation that had the entire First Take set absolutely lit this morning. And I'm talking about Stephen A. Smith standing up out of his chair, screaming about how disrespectful it is that nobody is giving the 49ers their proper respect as NFC contenders. The main story that emerged wasn't just that San Francisco has rattled off 3 consecutive wins to improve to 9-4 and position themselves firmly in the playoff picture. It was about the bold declaration that needs to be made, which is that the 49ers are a legitimate threat to win the NFC, and anyone dismissing them as just another playoff team is completely missing what's happened. When Stephen A. made his opening statement saying, "I'm telling you this right now, and I believe it. The Niners are a threat to win the NFC." Let me say that again. The Niners are a threat to win the NFC. You could feel the energy in the studio shift, because everyone knew this was going to spark major debate about whether he's right or if he's overreacting to a soft 3-game winning streak. Let me start by giving you the full context that First Take was establishing at the beginning of the broadcast, because understanding the state of both conferences and how wide open everything is right now is absolutely essential for grasping why the 49ers situation is so intriguing. The panel was breaking down how both the NFC and AFC are as wide open as they've been in years, how there genuinely isn't a great team in the entire National Football League right now, which is kind of crazy considering we're in December heading into Week 14. Stephen A. was making the passionate argument that when you don't have dominant teams separating themselves from the pack, that's when experience, coaching, and playoff pedigree matter, more than regular season records or flashy statistics. The First Take crew was discussing how the 49ers, despite all their injuries to Nick Bosa and Fred Warner, despite the front office not making moves at the trade deadline, have shown incredible mental toughness and resilience that separates championship organizations from pretenders. But here's what really got the First Take analysts engaged in heated debate. And this is where Stephen A.'s argument about culture and coaching becomes central to everything. He was pounding the desk, talking about how this is a credit to the culture that Kyle Shanahan has built in San Francisco. How when you talk to players who've been around that organization, they all say it starts with Shanahan creating an environment where players love football, can be themselves, but also police each other and hold teammates accountable. The panel was discussing how most teams would have completely folded and given up the season when they lost their 2 best defensive players in Bosa and Warner. But the 49ers just kept fighting and grinding and finding ways to win games. Stephen A., was arguing that you cannot teach that type of organizational resilience, that it's built over years of winning playoff games and competing at the highest level, and that it gives San Francisco a massive advantage over teams like the Bears, who might be talented but haven't been through the fire yet. The show dove deep into the coaching staff discussion and why this might be the 49ers' biggest advantage heading into the playoffs. And here's where you really see why Stephen A. is so confident in their chances despite the adversity. The First Take panel was breaking down how, when you get into do-or-die playoff games, coaching matters more than almost anything else, and the 49ers have one of the absolute best staffs in the entire league, with Kyle Shanahan running the offense, Robert Saleh back running the defense, and Brant Boyer leading a much-improved special teams unit. Stephen A. was acknowledging the elephant in the room that yes, Shanahan has come up short in some massive games including Super Bowls, but he's also won a ton of huge playoff games and consistently has his teams prepared and executing at elite levels. The analysts were discussing how in chess matches between coaching staffs on game day, the 49ers have been winning those battles all season, which is a major reason they're 9-4 despite being decimated by injury. What the First Take crew kept emphasizing, and I think this is absolutely critical for understanding why this isn't just hype, is how the 49ers offense is heating up at exactly the right time heading into the crucial stretch run. The panel was showing analytics demonstrating that since that Rams loss, where San Francisco kind of got exposed, the offense has been one of the best units in the entire NFL when measuring success rate and EPA per play. Stephen A. was going through the resume of what they've done in these 3 wins, dropping 41 points on the road against Arizona, with Brock Purdy throwing 3 touchdowns, and Christian McCaffrey getting a hat trick, surviving 3 Purdy turnovers to beat Carolina by 11 while still controlling the game throughout, and then going into Cleveland in miserable weather conditions against one of the top defenses in football and still scoring 26 points efficiently. The First Take analysts were making the argument that these aren't fluke wins or surviving by the skin of your teeth. These are dominant performances that show a team hitting their stride. The panel spent extensive time analyzing that Cleveland game specifically and why it was such a statement win that validates everything Stephen A. is saying. And this sparked really passionate debates about whether we're giving the 49ers enough credit. The analysts were breaking down all the historical trends working against San Francisco in that game. Purdy's terrible track record in bad weather, including his awful performance in Cleveland back in 2023. Kyle Shanahan's 1-9 record, all-time against Jim Schwartz-led defenses, with his offenses averaging under 16 points per game in those matchups. The weather conditions being absolutely brutal with wind and cold. And despite all of that, Shanahan's offense executed beautifully with Purdy, accounting for 2 touchdowns while managing the conditions intelligently. The offensive line giving up just 1 sack to Myles Garrett, who has 19 on the season, and the team being opportunistic in the red zone. Stephen A. was screaming that that's the type of performance that shows you're ready for playoff football, that you can win in adverse conditions against quality opponents. What I found particularly fascinating during today's First Take discussion was when they started showing the cumulative offensive statistics and making the case that this has actually been a really good offense all season, despite some perception issues. The panel was going through rankings showing the 49ers are 7th in total yards, 12th in yards per game, 9th in total touchdown, number 1 in the entire NFL in first downs, 5th in completion percentage, 2nd in passing yards. Stephen A. was acknowledging, yes, the interception numbers at 29th aren't great and need cleaning up. Yes, the rushing attack has been problematic at 24th in rushing yards and 31st in yards per carry, but the 3rd down conversion rate is 3rd in the league, and the red zone efficiency is middle of the pack, which is actually better than last year. The First Take crew was making the argument that if this run game can get even slightly more efficient, with McCaffrey getting healthier, this offense becomes absolutely terrifying for any defense to face in a playoff setting. The show also explored the remaining schedule and why these final 3 games are going to be absolutely massive for determining whether the 49ers are real or just playing well against weak competition. And honestly, this was one of the most compelling parts of the segment. The analysts were breaking down how after the Week 14 bye, San Francisco plays Tennessee, which should be manageable, then goes to Indianapolis on Monday Night Football, where the Colts will be desperate fighting for their playoff lives, then hosts the number 1 seeded Chicago Bears on Sunday Night Football at Levi's Stadium, in what could decide playoff positioning for both teams, and finally closes with the Seahawks in Week 18, which could literally be for the NFC West title or even the Conference's top seed. Stephen A. was getting animated, talking about how, if the 49ers can navigate this gauntlet successfully, they'll have earned their credentials rather than backing into the playoffs, and that the Bears game specifically will tell us everything we need to know about whether they're truly elite. What really struck me during the first take analysis was when they started discussing the defensive improvement and why San Francisco's defense rounding into form now, despite being so young, is a really encouraging sign. The panel was pointing out how the 49ers have given up just 17 points total in their last 2 games combined. And while yes, those came against Carolina and Cleveland, who aren't offensive powerhouses, the NFL is hard, and most games are decided by 1 score. Stephen A. was making the argument that this defense, which lost so many high-priced veterans in the offseason and brought in tons of youth, was always going to have growing pains early. But now you're seeing young players like C.J. West, Alfred Collins, and Evan Stout making legitimate contributions and improving weekly under Saleh's coaching. The First Take crew was praising how players like Jere Brown, who was benched earlier in the season, are now playing at high level, showing that good coaching can get guys on track when they buy into the system. The panel also spent significant time analyzing the special teams transformation under Brant Boyer and why it's been such an underrated but important storyline, and this sparked interesting discussions about how championship teams need all 3 phases clicking. The analysts were going through how special teams was a glaring weakness under Shanahan for years with Brian Schneider as coordinator. But this offseason, they made the change to Boyer, who's highly respected in NFL circles, and the unit has responded after a rough start. The First Take crew was showing highlights of Sky Moore, who came over in a seemingly minor trade with Kansas City, but has been one of the best returners in football, with that 98-yard kickoff return against Arizona and 66-yard punt return against Cleveland, both setting up scores at crucial moments. The panel was praising the organizational decision to move on from third-round pick Jake Moody when he wasn't cutting it, and bringing in Eddie Pinheiro, who went 22 of 22 before injury, then adding Matt Gay, who's been perfect in his first 2 games. Stephen A. was making the point that these are the types of moves that championship organizations make without getting caught up in sunk cost fallacy. One aspect that got really heated debate was when they started discussing the intangibles and playoff experience factor, with Stephen A. arguing this gives the 49ers a massive edge over sexier teams with better records. He was making the passionate case that while San Francisco underwent a youth movement and let go of expensive veterans, there are still battle-tested players all over this roster who've been through deep playoff runs and know exactly what January football requires. The First Take panel was discussing how in do-or-die playoff situations, you simply cannot replicate that experience or teach that composure under pressure. That having players who've been there before is invaluable. The analysts were contrasting the 49ers' playoff resume with teams like the Bears or Lions, who are having great regular seasons but are largely unproven when the stakes get highest, and the margin for error shrinks to nothing. Listen, after watching the entire First Take segment this morning about the 49ers being a legitimate NFC threat and whether Stephen A. is right to be this bullish on their chances, I'm absolutely convinced that he's onto something, and everyone dismissing San Francisco is going to look foolish come January. This is a team with one of the best coaching staffs in football that knows how to prepare for and win playoff games. With battle-tested veterans who've been through the gauntlet multiple times, with an offense that's hitting its stride at exactly the right moment, and with a defense that's improving week to week as young players develop and gain experience. Yes, the schedule during this 3-game win streak hasn't been murderous, but they're dominating inferior competition the way good teams should. The NFC is wide open without a truly dominant team, which means experience and coaching matter more than ever. And the 49ers have both in abundance. If they can get through this brutal final stretch, including that Bears game and Seahawks finale, they'll enter the playoffs as dangerous as any team in the conference. And I guarantee you nobody is going to want to face Kyle Shanahan's squad in a single elimination game when everything is on the line.